Greetings, and thank you for joining us for another SANS ICS Concept overview. I'm Don C. Weber of Cutaway Security and a certified SANS instructor. In this concept overview, I'm joined by Tim Medin, a SANS senior instructor and course author of SEC 560, Network Penetration Testing and Ethical Hacking. He is also the CEO and founder of Red Siege Information Security. I asked him to talk to us about Active Directory service accounts because of his background in Kerberos security. Server account security plays an important role in the security of the control environments management servers found in the Purdue Level 3 environment. Tim helps us understand this concept and provides us with a few pointers to improve the security of these accounts. If you enjoy this video and the topics we cover in the SANS ICS Concept overviews, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment if you have a question about this topic or suggestions for future content. Today I'm being joined by Tim Medin of Red Siege. I've asked Tim here to talk about some of the Microsoft service accounts that we'll find in our Level 3 environments. So Tim, why don't you start us off by telling everybody who you are and
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. First off, Don, I appreciate the opportunity to join you here. My name is Tim Medin. I have been in security for a while. Actually, my undergrad was in electrical engineering, and I did some control systems. Spent plenty of times in all sorts of cool environments, working as a systems integrator. These days, I do offensive security. At a company called Red Siege, we do pen testing, all sorts of different iterations of that. I also teach with SANS. I am a senior instructor. I am the lead author of the pen testing course. So that's my, I guess, brief background there.
That's 560, right?
That is indeed, yes.
Okay.
Join us in person, hopefully.
Oh, yes, excellent. Yeah. And what I was, and thanks for joining us. What I was really hoping to that you can help us understand, the concept that I think that people need to understand a little bit more about when we're talking about our OT environments, our control networks. We have the level 3 environments, which have a lot of management servers in there. There's typically some type of Microsoft Active Directory there. We have IIS deployments and Microsoft SQL databases that are integrating with a number of different services. And one of the concerns that I have in these types of environments whenever I'm going in is, some people have taken into account the permissions for users, but one of the concerns that I have are the configurations for the service accounts. So I was hoping that you could talk to us a little bit about some of the attacks that happen against service accounts and, kind of finish up with some things that organizations and administrators should consider to help improve that, to improve the security of that situation. So I'll go ahead and let you start.
Sure. Yeah. So these service accounts, these are the accounts that are going to be behind, as the name describes, behind those services. In your traditional IT environment, these are very long-standing accounts, right? Because you're not going to go in and change the account password for some of these services. Now, of course, as you know as well as anybody, the environment in which you're working here with a lot of these ICS, DCS, whatever we want to call this, those are designed to run much longer than your average network, right? Like I'm getting a new laptop every 3 years. These things are in place for decades. Mm-hmm. So when a service account is long-standing in the corporate world, where we're turning over hardware every 3 years, these are even longer standing, maybe even like, chiseled in stone of some kind, or as part of, when the Big Bang happened, when everything formed, these accounts came out of that, right? So there's a whole different level of long standing, right? And there's sort of the obvious piece here as well, preaching to the choir, is the uptime requirements are drastically more strict than it is everywhere else, right? So these two pieces means, we've set this service account up quite literally maybe a decade or more ago. And we see this in the IT side of the world, definitely more so in the OT side of the world. And it just, you don't change it, because you change it, things might go offline. We can't risk that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So understanding what does that actually mean. Now you might be thinking like, well, these service accounts, no one's logging in directly to the SQL server and can interact with that service. Well, there still are ways where those can be attacked. I mean, the simple sort of traditional way is an online password guessing attack. Now, ideally, from a security perspective, with air quotes, there's lockouts with that. Less than ideal, if we start locking out service accounts, we start taking services offline, denial of service, that is not a good thing, right? So security trade-off with the operational aspect of things, right? So
I've got a quick question about that.
Sure.
So when somebody's configuring and installing a service and the service account gets set up, is that typically a manual process, or is that a part of the installation of the service? In other words, are the administrators creating those accounts, creating those passwords, and therefore have to understand password lengths and so forth? Or is the operating system and the application setting up those accounts?
Yeah, so typically what happens if you've got a service account, what's typically happening is an admin is going in and going into Active Directory, creating an account, picking a password, ideally a good password, and then using that for Active Directory, using that to help configure the service. And, you know, we set this up ages ago, and the perspective was like, okay, so if I get access to this account, whoop-de-doo. But the game to some degree has changed a little bit because of some, I shouldn't say newer at this point, but maybe from the OT side of things where things were, you know, very long standing, it is a little bit newer. So one of the pieces with those service accounts is if you're doing Active Directory, we're going to use Kerberos authentication. In fact, let me pull up a very quick slide here to give you a quick peek at what the heck does Kerberos look like.
Okay. I can see it, so should be good.
Okay. I didn't get the green border on my side, so I'm like, what the heck is going on? So really quickly, what happens with Kerberos authentication is the user is going to authenticate, right? Let's say Don wants to connect to a service, or Don's computer, could be either, wants to connect to a particular service. What happens is Don first needs to get a ticket. This is sort of like the ticket to get into Disney World, let's say. It's that magic band, if you've ever been, right? It doesn't get you in anything. You get to walk in the front gate. Now, if you want to go on any ride, you have to get a ticket in Kerberos specific to that particular service. The first piece here we've got, I'm going to use my password in a sense to authenticate me. I'm then going to get this ticket granting ticket. This allows me to request access to those various services. Now, the interesting piece with this is that service ticket is encrypted using the password hash of the target service. The initial one, it does use my password hash as part of that, but it goes directly to the domain controller. The opportunity to catch that is a little bit limited. I'd have to have a machine in the middle position to capture Don authenticating somewhere else. With the ticket granting ticket, the ticket granting ticket, once I have one of those, and any user, any service, anything can get a ticket granting ticket. Once I have that, I'm going to request, as I mentioned, this service ticket. Now, the domain controller does not decide, hey, does Don have access to this SQL server? Does Don have access to this file server? The domain controller doesn't have the resources. If the domain controller was going to decide whether Don has access to these resources and every single file on that file share, you'd have to have a supercomputer. And it would be extremely latent because the additional checks and stuff. So what happens is with this ticket, it says, okay, here's Don. Don is it's like a driver's license, let's say. Here is Don. Here's where he lives, and information about him. And we're going to put a hologram on it to say, we're good to go. So now when the target service gets it, it's like, oh, cool. I see the hologram and I see this is Don. I'm going to give Don this level of access. Now, remember here, though, is this service ticket. Let me try to get my pen ready here. The service ticket here in this step 3 and 4 here This is encrypted using the password hash of the target service. By the way, these slides are from the Security 560 course. We spend much more time on it than we're going to have here and discuss this. The interesting piece here is because I have this password hash. Let me find the, there we go. Oops. Did I get the right slide? That is not the right one. Come on. There we go. Is because this ticket uses the password hash for the target service, what I can do is I can request tickets for everything. So it'd be like going to a Disney World. I've got my Magic Mandate. I've got my ticket granting ticket. I'm going to say, I want to go on the Haunted Mansion. I want to go on the Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. I want all of the tickets. Because it's in that ticket is encrypted using the password hash of the target service, I now have piles of tickets and I can start attacking those. So what I can do is extract all those tickets from memory that I have and start guessing passwords. So I'll take a password, I will hash, attempt to decrypt. Take a password, hash, decrypt. This is actually an offline attack. I request that ticket once. I then take it to my offline system for this cracking. Now, because it's cracking, there's not going to be any lockouts. I am not hitting the live service. This is an offline attack. Because these services are very, very long-standing and they're going to be up for a long time and the passwords just frankly aren't going to be rotated, I could let this, if I'm a sophisticated, dedicated attacker, I could let this quite literally run for a year to try to get.
So those original tickets, are they only good for a limited amount of time? But you're trying to guess the password that was used for it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, that's a solid point. So I'm taking these tickets, taking them offline, and I'm taking them out to the shed, and I'm going to try to beat these things up and try to recover a password from that. Once I have that password, because it's very likely that it's not rotated, I can come back and do any number of attacks. I might be able to log in straight to that system with that password. There's another attack called the silver ticket attack, where I can now, because those tickets are encrypted using the password hash, I can now create my own because I know the password. I can generate a hash. I can now create my own tickets and get access to more data than I should on that target service. And by the way, I've got a hour-long presentation on Kerberos if you want to read any of that or watch any parts of that. redsiege.com/Kerb101. That's KERB 101. It's redsiege.com/Kerb101.
I'll make sure that's in the show notes. So.
Cool. Oh, sweet. Fancy. Good deal. Questions so far?
No, I think so far I understand it. Certainly any of our listeners who are here to, that have this is new material to them. They'll want to go and listen to your talk and look for some other things. So please continue.
Sure. Now, the key here is for this kind of attack, it's actually called Kerb roasting, hence my shirts. Jay Kahn at Red Siege made a bunch of cool shirts. It's a riff on the Beatles shirt, I think. Anyway.
Oh, okay.
So there's this mapping between the accounts as SPN. We're going to query for all of those, request piles of tickets, do the offline attack. Again, we can log in. Now, the couple of things here for that can stop this. Let's talk through some of that. So if this is tied to an account that someone created, an administrator created, there's a possibility we could crack that, right? Assuming that the administrator picked a password that is crackable. Now, if you're selecting a good, secure, long password, great, right? The feasibility of cracking.
I've seen recommendations where the passwords for a Surface account is 30 characters rather than like the normal 15 for a system administrator, and that's because it might be long to type when you have to use it or if you need to set something up. But that's the point. You're never really typing this. So having a long passphrase that hopefully that is potentially generated using some secure password generator probably would be best. But since you're not using this all the time to log in, having that extra length and complexity is okay or desired.
Yeah, absolutely. You are not typing this in. You type it in like once to configure the service, and then you're good to go. So people are like, I don't want to retype it. Well, you're not going to. So a good password here is very important. Also, so we can set this account up to use a different type of account. If it's a user created, again, we might have the possibility of an administrator picking a bad password. Now, there's ways where it can use what's called the computer account. So with computers, they have a password hash in Active Directory. Now, that is randomly generated, or at least random enough that it's not feasible for you to guess that. If you see this account is tied to a computer account, you are not feasibly going to be able to crack that, because Windows and the domain and Microsoft randomly generate this account, completely infeasible. So I want that user created account, not that computer account, from an attacker's perspective, right? I'm an attacker. I bleed red, as we say.
Are there issues? Are there concerns about doing it as the computer account? Are there weaknesses around that?
Yeah, so it depends a lot on how the service is set up and how it's going to be used. So with some of the clustering, you need an account that can be used on multiple systems, right? So in that case, the computer account doesn't make sense, because you would have to have multiple computers. They're going to have different password hashes, and things get a little bit funky. It's also, to some degree, dependent on how the installer works. So, for example, if you would set up an Exchange server, if you click, done, Exchange is going to try to use mostly computer accounts, which means you're not going to be able to crack those. SQL Server kind of pushes you to use a user-generated account. We'll come back to some nuances there. Again, oftentimes because of clustering and such, but it's a little bit of the guidance there pushes you towards this user-created account to some degree.
Yeah, now, within the management servers that I'm familiar with, and certainly there are all kinds of different setups, and when we're talking about data historians that are getting a lot of information, perhaps some clustering associated with specific vendor types there. But in my experience, most of the management servers have been just single systems, single servers, both from an IIS standpoint and a database standpoint.
Yeah, it depends on how those service accounts are configured by the service, how it sets it up. Frankly, the default guidance on how to set this stuff up as well. Going back in time, maybe a decade or so, the guidance for setting up a database server, a Microsoft SQL server, the official guidance was to follow this 3-page document to get the permissions correct. Well, there were tons of blog posts that are like, just make it a domain admin. Who cares? Because it just worked. And frankly, given the attack landscape at the time, the risks weren't as high as they are now. Kerberos very much changes some of that.
Okay, yeah, and I understand that that's a concern. Everything I read up on associated with service accounts, understanding that configuration. And one of my biggest concerns is going into an environment and having these service accounts have those domain administrator capabilities. So, if that is the case, and we're using so if we give it that permissions, but we're using the strong passwords and all of that, is it okay? Are we still just worried about a weak passwords at the initial setup, or should we really be concerned about the permissions that are provided to the service accounts?
Yeah, so there's both there, right? Like the solid password is one piece of that puzzle. Over permissioning, I mean, we do. Literally, I do offensive stuff all the time. We do pen tests all the time. That's what I do, what my company does. And the biggest problem that we see is too many permissions to things. User X has way too much access to a file share and their sensitive data there, right? Because I think about it from the attacker's perspective. They don't need access to everything. They need enough access to accomplish their goals, right? How much of your environment would they have to steal to make them live comfortably for the next year, 2 years life, right?
Mhm.
It's asymmetric, right? Somebody in a very low cost of living country, they get a few $100,000. That's huge. That is absolutely life changing, maybe even retirement. Where to your company, you're like $300,000. Whoop de do. Who cares, right?
Well, I
So
mean,
it's asymmetric.
yeah.
And then related to that is how much data has to go before you're now in the news, right?
So, I mean,
Before,
yeah, and
go ahead.
that, well, this kind of leads me back, and it's a point that I want to get across, because I see a lot of people, especially that are not familiar with these types of things, and when we say that we have a service account that allows you access to a database, well, is that it? So if you get a hold of these accounts, is that the only service? Are we concerned about this providing access to other locations within the Windows environment? How do those service accounts, how does your team and how do attackers leverage access to these to gain more either more permissions or connections to additional systems?
Yeah. So I mean, the obvious answer to some degree is if I get access to this account, I Kerberos it. That's when we steal the ticket, crack that. I immediately take it back and I reflect it back to that system, right? If it's running on that system, it needs privileges on that system. Ideally, you set it up so that there's no reason that SQL service account needs to log in interactively through the GUI. No, it's not going to, right? So prevent that. And if it happens, you have a problem.
Alert, yeah.
You've stopped it, but you've also now created a detection, right? Also, if somebody tries to log in, if you see a failed login for that service isn't going to log in incorrectly. It's going to type it correctly every single time. You now have a detection to follow up on and escalate. And hopefully you can, catch the attacker before they start stealing your data or, ransomware and whatever. I don't know how to verbify that.
Right.
But many times too is those service accounts will have access to way too much data. Not just way too much data. I mean, the database server needs access to the data so that it can base the data or whatever.
I guess that's where we're getting back to, kind of what we were talking about before. If it does have too many permissions, if it has domain administrator, not only can it interact with that one system, but potentially now you can inadvertently allow that to be gain access to other servers as well.
Yeah, and yeah. So the first part is access to other systems, but also too much to its own system. So the SQL server should not be. Your service account is never going to log into the GUI. That doesn't even make sense, right? And there's no reason that account needs to be logging into any other servers that aren't database servers. So if that's happening, whole different problem.
Yeah, and that's a great point. First we need to be concerned about prevention, but also we need to be concerned about detection. We have all of these permissions that we configure, security settings configured for the Windows environment, for our services. On top of that, we have all of these. A lot of organizations are purchasing these different security controls to help identify these things. So, detection is the next part, and then I'm always concerned about response to these. And so these, I think that the things that you mentioned right there are things that we can easily set up an alert for within whether the organization's doing it within a security operations center, a SOC, within the OT environment, or they're pushing those out to their corporate SOC. These are the types of things that can help them understand very quickly that there's an issue that needs to be investigated. Are there other, so you mentioned account logins, using this to the actual server itself. You also failed authentication. Are there any other detection mechanisms that organizations should be taking into consideration?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to look specifically at the Kerberos the answer is not to turn off Kerberos. You're going to start breaking things. You're going to be less secure. And people are like, well, let's just fix that. That's not a fix. Don't do that. A lot of it's baselining to some degree. Hey, all of a sudden, why is Don requesting a ticket for everything? That's weird. That is weird. Why are there so many ticket requests in this short period of time? Yes, when you first boot up a system, you'll get a small spike, but if it crosses, figure out what that threshold is. And if it crosses that threshold, someone's in and trying to pull stuff, and hopefully you can
So,
catch them before they start moving or exfilling or whatever.
so are you talking about frequency of requests? Is that a frequency thing, or are you talking about the actual events where I'm requesting tickets to other things?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I mean, I'm not pretending this is the easiest problem to solve, but if you requesting all of a sudden, like, why is Don requesting 100 tickets? That's atypical. Let's follow up with that.
And I think within an OT environment, with an ICS environment, that the best approach, especially if they don't have detection involved, is just to ensure that they're taking a look at those service accounts and ensuring that they have a long passphrase
Yep.
for those. Certainly, is it difficult to go and change those after they've been implemented?
Usually it's not. The problem is everyone's a little bit scared of what's this actually going to break.
Mm-hmm.
A better approach, I mean, a long password is great. Even better is what's called a managed service account. With the they call it now a group managed service account. What happens now is, you know how those computer accounts, we talked about that, where Microsoft Windows, whatever, generates this essentially random value, and it rotates it every so often.
Okay.
With these managed service accounts, we can do the same sorts of things. So it's going to generate a random password that's completely infeasible for anyone to guess. Additionally, it's automatically going to rotate. So even if that hash is compromised, it has a limited usefulness because it's automatically going to rotate after a while. Even better than that long password, but moving there takes a few extra steps. It's not terrible, but people are like, it's different, so I'm a little bit scared. At least you should pick a long, not easily guessable password.
Yeah, and you know, we talk about how inflexible some of the OT environments are, some of the level 3 environments are within the industry. That really depends on the sector that we're talking about. You know, some of the gas and oil, electrical, that might be the case. Somebody in the food and beverage might be rotating their infrastructure out on a regular basis, 3 to 5 years. But everybody needs to start considering the requirements, putting these into the requirements associated with the implementation of those services, and to address some of the insecurities around the implementation, and then hopefully also around the detection as well. Tim, I really appreciate you kind of going over this topic with us. Are there is there anything that you'd like to bring up that we haven't talked about, or any of your final thoughts?
I don't think so. I mean, if you've got any questions, hit me up on Twitter at Tim Medin. Last name is spelled Medin.
Excellent.
Send me an email, tim@redsiege.com, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, clarify anything. Also, the presentation, redsiege.com/Kerb101, where we talk through Kerberos in an hour, talk through the attacks and such as well.
Absolutely. This is a complicated subject. There is so much more to it. You and I were talking about how we didn't go and want to talk about certain different directions, so that there can be some really confusing things around this. And certainly, hopefully, the Windows administrators are doing their research around this, understanding how to correctly implement permissions and correctly configure these accounts, their Windows domains, when they can. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this topic. I'll make sure everything that you just talked about is in the show notes, your Twitter and your email. So I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. Absolutely. And have a great day, sir.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another concept overview with the SANS ICS and Cutaway security teams. Please let us know if there are other topics you would like us to cover in the comments below. If you enjoyed the content, please be sure to like and subscribe to the SANS ICS YouTube channel. This has been Don C. Weber of Cutaway Security. Go forth and do good things.